Oh, it working?
Yeah, it looks like it's working perfectly.
Working perfectly. Okay.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ultimate Radio Show. And today I'm here with someone who I've wanted to have on the show for many, many years. Didn't have your number. Couldn't get your number. You didn't want to give out the number. But finally, I got it. Mr. Mark Andreini, would you introduce your other half?
This is my brother Pete, who's my main surfing buddy.
Yeah.
And so wherever
I was your main surfing buddy.
only that day I met you in the water. when there was a one-wave set, and I was hoping you'd let me have it. We had to become friends first.
Did I let you have a wave? I think I did.
By accident. That's because you took the one before it
Listen,
that had shape and left me the one that didn't have any shape.
Count yourself lucky.
Yeah, that's how that worked.
So, what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to record the history of Mark Andreini. But as my friend Mark and another Mark, that's a fan of yours, said, you should do it decade by decade, which we have done with Doug Howell, decade by decade. So, should we start with like the 20s or the 30s?
Well, the reason that we got this job is because we're old enough to be able to talk about history.
So should we talk
That's
about?
pretty obvious.
So where do we start? Where does one start with you?
Well, if it's when I was alive, then we'd have to start with the 50s.
Start with the 50s. Okay, I'm gonna check the camera's working.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. The 50s makes sense.
So I was born in 1951.
Where?
In San Mateo, California.
Okay.
That's by the San Francisco airport.
I know where that is, yeah.
Not most people don't.
Yeah, I know where the San Mateo is.
So we were both born there, and our grandfather came from Italy and had his family there. So that's where we started. My dad met our mom. They were swimmers. They loved Boulder Creek. They met at Boulder Creek swimming back there at that pond that
In
everyone
Boulder
swims
Creek?
in Boulder Creek.
No
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. So that was the beginning, but things went awry early on.
Yeah.
And so after they had me and Pete, my sister, and our sister Lisa, they split up as probably maybe 4 or 5, and we're all a year apart. So we end up with a single mom raising us, and she very quickly wanted to move away from the Bay Area, so she moved us to Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And was it 1957 or so, or 6, maybe 1956. So we were little kids. We moved to Santa Barbara because my mom and my dad both loved swimming, and she taught us to body surf. She took us every single weekend to East Beach, where we were raised.
In Santa Barbara?
In Santa Barbara,
okay.
Body surfing, and they didn't have boogie boards or any of that stuff then, so we just body surfed. And she had been to Hawaii at some point and surfed Waikiki with the Beach Boys, and told us all about what it was like to
Your
ride
mom
a
did?
surfboard. My mom.
Yeah. And what's your mom's name?
Gail.
Gail.
And she is the one that really is responsible for us being surfers. So she brings us to the beach. She taught us how to swim,
Yeah.
body surf, told us about surfing. And so we decided that we wanted someday to get surfboards. So
So you had to kind of imagine what it was like. So she told you, but you had to kind of imagine what it was like to be riding something.
So we have to just think about this. In the 50s, since we're talking history,
Yeah.
very few people surfed. There was only 200 or 300 surfers, probably in California. The only people who surfed in the 50s, because boards were all made out of wood, they just gone to balsa wood maybe in the late 40s.
And they were heavy.
Of course.
Yeah.
But lifeguards and fishermen, scuba divers, anybody involved with the ocean, those were surfers, not land people. So surfing was a he-man, waterman's lifestyle.
Right, lifestyle, right.
And so there weren't people surfing. You didn't go anywhere and see anyone on a surfboard. There was no such thing. So we only could imagine what it was like. We had never seen it.
Right.
And so that's how the 50s were.
Right.
It's just.
What were you born? How old were you first got on that? When your mom came back and talked to you about surfing, how old were you then?
We'd have been 9 years old.
How old were you?
9, 8.
Yeah, be 8. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're in grade school, you know, fourth and fifth grade maybe, and we thought it would be the greatest thing ever. And so our dad somehow or another found 2 pop-out surfboards for us, and we got them for Christmas, and it was 1961. And I'll never forget.
Okay.
There was no brand. They were
Nope.
D-fin boards. They were pop-outs made with a foam core and matte fiberglass over the outside. They were made in a mold.
Like a boat, right?
Like boat construction.
Yeah.
And then they'd pigment them with these. I think I had blue streaks and you had green, or vice versa.
And you still got first choice.
I don't remember how that worked. It would have been me, because
Was you
I'm
the
bigger than
oldest?
him. Yeah. That's how it worked.
Not older, just bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Size matters.
Yes, at that age, definitely.
Yeah.
They're both the same length, right? About
9 foot.
9 foot board.
They weighed 29 pounds, and I weighed 80 pounds, and he weighed 70 pounds.
So how quickly after you went, were they wrapped? Like were they under the tree and wrapped, or were they just like?
Can you remember that far back? I have no idea. I mean,
But
think
how
about
quickly?
how long ago
But
that
how
was.
quickly did you get? How soon was it?
We went straight to East Beach, I'm sure the next day.
Yeah.
My mom might drive us. So this is before there was any such thing as child endangerment. And so my mom had a Ford convertible. The top never went up.
Yeah.
And so we stuck the boards behind the front seat.
Yeah.
And then we sat on top of them.
Yeah.
So just picture us,
Yeah.
we're like this, you know,
Yeah.
looking over the top of the windshield, and
Yeah.
Mom's down there driving. If she would have hit the brakes,
You'd have gone flying.
we'd have gone right in front of the car, and she'd have run over us both. And life would have been a lot better.
She tried 4 or 5 times,
Yeah.
we held on.
Oh, you held on, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like riding a wave.
Pretty
Almost.
much, yeah.
Pretty much, right?
Before
Big
chords.
drop. Huh?
Before chords.
Yeah.
So she took us down to East Beach, and of course they didn't. They had no rocker. They were about like this table.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd be 2 inches in each end of rocker.
Right.
And so the hardest part of surfing then was purling. You could catch a wave and not go straight down and purl, which is
Right.
named after pearl diving.
Yeah.
It's straight into the bottom. You get launched. The board goes 30 feet in the air and then
Yeah.
comes down and almost kills you almost every single time. And so we found out that Ledbetter was really the premier spot for surfing, even though we'd never been there. So we drove up there. It's
That's
only
in Santa Barbara.
yes, by the city college,
Okay.
just west of the harbor, Santa Barbara Harbor.
Yeah.
And so we went there and surfed, and I never saw anyone else there. So we'd never seen anyone surf yet. Then finally, our parents drove us down to Rincon, which is 12 miles south
Yeah.
of Santa Barbara, and that's where there were actually people surfing. And that's the first time we ever saw anybody ride a wave that I recall.
So they pop. So how different was your pop? Did you pop up, or did you just kind of scramble up, or was it pretty or not pretty when you first went out there at Ledbetter?
Wait, no one was there, right?
No.
You should have seen us.
You guys were
Our
late.
Man, we had it wired.
You
She
did.
taught us how to surf on the living room
Who
floor.
did?
Our
Who?
mom.
Your mom did?
Mother.
Yeah.
How to catch the wave, how to stand up. I mean, she actually coached us. And actually the first waves we ever stood up on were not Ledbetter. That was the second step. It was the sandbar, the Santa Barbara Harbor.
Yeah.
The end of the sand spit, which is in the Endless Summer. There's film of the Santa Barbara sand spit with George Greeno riding his balsa wood kneeboard. That's the opening of the Endless Summer. And so that's why everybody today knows about the sandbar. I mean, now it's famous for barrel riding.
Right.
But when we were there, we were only barrel riding in our own minds because it was only this big.
Right.
But we each caught a wave. My mom drove us to West Beach, and then you paddle across the channel to get there. More child endangerment. And there were like
Paddle across the
11 and 12,
Yeah.
you know, paddling through a shipping channel.
Some giant boat coming at us.
Oh, yeah. And we caught
You guys are lucky to be
whitewater.
alive. It's 11.
She tried to kill us so many
Yeah,
times.
many times.
We tried to get a lawyer. It's been too many
Did she
years.
have her own board? Did she have her own board?
Mom never surfed in all the years that we knew her.
Really?
Yeah. Only those years before she told us about it, before we were born.
Wow, it's amazing.
Always a swimmer and a
Yeah.
beach person.
But never want to get on a board.
Yeah.
No.
She's very athletic, though. I mean, she was good at anything she did.
Yeah.
So those were our first waves. Well, the connection. So
That was in 50. That was in 50.
that was 61.
61.
So the 50s led to the 60s. Now we're into the 60s.
We're in the 60s. Yeah.
Because there's not a lot to tell about that anyone wants to hear about when we were in grade school, about all the times that we got in trouble at school and
Sir,
got in trouble at home. And
Did you get
got
trouble by
grounded.
skipping class, going surfing? And
That was in the 60s.
Yeah.
We lived for that.
Yeah.
We lived for that.
What was punishment for skipping school?
Punishment for everything in our day was being grounded.
Or was it just that?
Because
Yeah.
in today's society, people never leave the house, so grounding them isn't a punishment.
No. Right.
But in our day,
Yeah.
we lived to not be home.
Right. Right. Wanted to go surfing.
We wanted to do anything but be home.
Yeah.
So we were always gone, so we would get grounded, and then we would have to figure out ways to go surfing while we're grounded, which was whenever Mom slept in. We'd get up early and go. We'd be back before she got up.
You think she knew?
What she did when she was pruning the hedge one time and my trunks were hanging on a branch inside the hedge, she came nose to nose with it. She couldn't laugh about it till I was in my 30s, though.
Your trunk. Of course, there's no
Hanging
wetsuit.
on a branch.
There was no wetsuit.
Of course not.
No, you had no wetsuit.
No, just trunks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was hanging from the. It was hanging in the bushes.
Inside the hedge.
What would you do that for? Did you think it was going to?
So she wouldn't find it. It needed to dry somewhere with a perfect
all right.
spot.
Yeah, but she
Yeah.
found it. You got
Who
busted.
would have thought somebody's going to be pruning the hedge and find my trunks?
Yeah.
You know, I had it all thought through. It wasn't just a random
Were you
move.
guys on par as far as antics and shenanigans, or was it?
Oh, he was way worse than
He
me.
was way worse than you.
Oh, God, yeah.
He's got he has such an angelic face too.
Yeah. So did Eddie Haskell. Yeah. We know the type.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that he
Okay,
was
so
way
we're in
worse
six,
than me.
we're in 60s now. What now? What now? Where was it?
Well, this is the part where because we're talking about Santa Cruz surf history.
Talk about wherever you want.
Well, because our
You
connection,
guys are still in Santa Barbara, though.
we've been in Santa Barbara till the 80s.
Okay.
But here's the interesting connection.
Okay.
Because we were born in San Mateo, we visited our dad every single summer and every single winter since we were little children. So we have surfed this north coast between Half Moon Bay and, well, actually even San Francisco, but between Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz, we've been surfing since we were like 13 and 14 years old. We would have to have somebody drive us.
Yeah.
But because we started surfing at such a young age, we were already coming up here, and we're now on the White Owl surf team. We're surfing in contests down there. So in the longboard days, we were proficient surfers, and we would come up to San Mateo. We made friends with one or two guys that we, knew when we were little tiny kids, and
Right.
they took up surfing too. And pretty soon we got connected to this whole little group of about 6 really hardcore San Mateo surfers who are still known today, like Phil
Keep
Hanrahan,
going. Yeah.
Paul Westledge,
Yeah.
John Chapin, Steve Nichols, the Hart brothers. A bunch of those guys became really good surfers this is still in the 60s.
Right.
So we had a lot of years of, spending our summers surfing Santa Cruz. And this is all, I'd say, now we're wearing wetsuits, but they're just short johns.
Right.
And maybe you'd have a jacket with trunks or just a short john. There was
Remember your first wetsuit?
I think it was a white stag with a beaver tail.
The white snag with beaver tail.
Do you remember yours?
Same.
We would have got him at that. There was like a sporting goods store.
Really thick rubber. You'd get a rash, and you'd have to go to the hospital.
That was horrid.
Horrible. Vaseline. Put Vaseline, it didn't help much.
No.
When you put the wetsuit on, you were like this.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't move.
Yeah.
And the sleeves went straight out, so your arms, our arms are this big around then, and they'd stick out. The
Right.
wetsuit. It was terrible. But yeah, normally you would build a fire on the beach before you went out, because you're surfing in trunks.
Right.
And even in Santa Barbara, the winters are not warm.
No.
But we would surf up here, and we rode longboards then that's all there was. But we all knee paddled because you didn't want to get in the water
Right.
unless you had to.
Right.
because it was frickin' freezing.
Right.
So you just stay on your knees and you catch the wave on your knees. It's totally different. Of course,
Yeah.
no cords.
Yeah.
There's no surf leashes, no wetsuits.
Right.
Just a short john. Which, can you imagine today if you pulled out a short john to surf anywhere here? Other than today,
I
when
tried
it's
one. I
warm?
tried one on at a nail sale a couple of years ago. My son goes, "No, Dad." No, Dad.
He would want to be
You
emancipated
look
if
like
you
an
took him
idiot.
to the beach wearing a short john.
Yeah. No, Dad. I come out of the change, the O'Neill sale. I came out of the change room. So, who invented the surf league? Do you know?
Well,
What's your
it's
story on it?
rumored.
It's
Well,
rumored.
now we were there,
Yeah.
so we lived in Santa Barbara, but we were up here surfing, and Pat O'Neill, most of all the O'Neills are personal friends of mine from Jack down, and over the years. But at that time, Pat was only an acquaintance, and he was the first guy that was publicized having the suction cup with the surgical tubing on the nose of his board, and that's why they called it a dog leash, because it was on his wrist, and he kind of steered the nose of his board around with it. And so I surfed with him when he was riding that. But the real story is that there was another guy, and there's no way I'm going to remember his name, but there was a guy in Santa Cruz that is the guy who started that whole idea of using a leash just before Pat. Pat's the one that gets the publicity for it.
Yeah. It was somebody else.
But let me tell you who the real person is. You know who Jim Foley is?
Jim Foley. I've heard of that name.
Okay, so Jim Foley is probably the greatest legend surfer in Santa Cruz.
Really?
Yes. Now you've got there's the real old timers. There's Al Weimers, who is a shop teacher making balsa boards in shop, and a lot of the old timers like Novak built boards with him. And then who's the guy who's the statue? Reed. Bob Reed? No, Reed is is like your most famous, legendary guy who comes from the plank era, redwood planks, and he knew the Duke, and was really a great surfer. But we're talking modern times of hot dog surfing. All of us, we're just a bunch of gremlins compared to those guys.
Right.
Clogging up the waterways.
Yeah.
But the first greatest Gremmy that ever lived, who's a pioneer, is Jim Foley. Now, Jim Foley is in the age bracket of Novak and Hout.
So he would
he's
be
around
in
80.
his 80s.
Yes, at the most. He's
Is he
like
still
80,
alive?
81. Yes.
Okay.
And Jim Foley is an incredible waterman. And in the 50s, going into the early 60s, he was the first guy to actually build and avidly ride 6-foot boards. He made twin fins and narrow high aspect ratio single fin boards.
Unheard of.
It's completely unheard of. He's the greatest underground legend alive. The most famous legend that everyone knows about, of course, is George Greenough, who's from Santa Barbara, who's one of our guys. But Jim Foley is older than George, and not by much, because George is 80. He'll be 81 this year. But Jim Foley in the 50s and early 60s was making shortboards and riding them in Santa Cruz, and he also put a leash, a leg rope on his board. So he's really the guy, the Santa Cruz guy who started the leg rope.
Right.
His went on his leg.
Yeah.
He drilled a hole through the fin.
Yeah.
And that way he could surf. In that period, all the woodboard guys surfed Pels. Then he could go surf Indicator at the lane on his small boards. The longest board he ever owned was a 710. That was a semi-gun. And we're talking 1959.
Unheard of.
It's completely unheard of.
Right.
He ended up being one of the anchor
Was
shapers
he like the
for
mad
O'Neill.
scientist type of thing? Like what the heck? Almost like
He's
that?
not like a mad scientist. He's a super regular guy.
Yeah.
Who he says, I'm just a Grammy out there doing disco moves on a shortboard. He just loved it. He just wanted to be experimental. His dad, Chuck Foley, loved experimenting with boards in the woodboard era, and they would go to San Onofre often and learn from Burhead and all the famous San Onofre guys around World War II, and they rode kook boxes and planks and
That's a big deal getting down to San Onofre.
Big deal.
Big deal. That's a trip.
Well, they'd go down.
Go to the moon. That's like right?
It had to take them a week to drive there.
Right.
And then they'd camp there, and because wood was expensive, his dad was so cheap, it was cheaper to buy 8-foot lengths of wood, and so all the boards that his dad made were short. They're riding 10-foot boards. They borrowed 8-foot boards because they're cheap, just like us. And so Jim Foley grew up with his dad making every kind of board, and so he picked it up from his dad, and shortboarding was what they did.
Right.
So anyway, ask any of the old timers. Jim Foley is the man. He's the man.
Can you still live in Santa Cruz, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's here.
Really?
We can get you connected.
That'd be kind of cool, huh? Maybe next
He's
time
the real
maybe
deal.
we can do a show next time with you and him.
I love that.
That'd be kind of cool, huh?
I wouldn't be worthy to sit there on the same table with him. The guy is really, you know, here's a cool story. The famous O'Neill logo, the classic one with the guy arching, Jim Foley drew that. That's Jim Foley who drew that when he worked at O'Neill.
Wow.
And a lot of guys know that, but not really a lot.
Yeah.
But he's just a wonderful guy. And they used to tell him that he could make all the boards he wanted for himself. But what was the story? That because he shaped there, he could make his own boards for O'Neill, and then then he'd sell them, and all the moms would buy the 6-foot boards he made for their little kids, his used boards, because he made all these experimental boards.
Right.
And all of his friends ribbed the crap out of it, you know. Hey Jim, when are you going to make the other half of that thing? You know, because he's in there shaping these 6-foot boards, and they just had. Can you imagine the ridicule that he took? And it was all in fun.
Who's laughing now?
Well, I think that it's a shame that he isn't better known. Anyway, that guy's a legend. So, anyway, back to the 60s. So we're visiting my dad, and so we were able to surf and be part of this culture.
Were you welcome here surfing?
Oh, let me tell you, there's a real connection. Santa Cruz hates LA. Okay? Yeah. It's okay that this is on. This being recorded, right? So they hate the South. Hate them, and they have a reputation of shunning all media exposure. Because Surfer Magazine was Dana Point, the Dana Point Mafia, all those famous guys down there. And everything that they recorded was all about Southern California. Right. You know, all the famous everybody from Southern California. When I just told you about Jim Foley, those people were never in the Surfing Magazine, and they were the finest of the finest. Surfers were up here. There was nobody better down there except for Phil Edwards, really, than what was going on up here. What was going on up here was incredible, the level of talent up here in that period of the early 60s. And so those guys hated...
Who was the surf? Give me a couple of names.
From the 60s? Yeah. Well, there's, Black Kolanowski, Mint Tasic, Bruce Philippi, who's actually from Santa Barbara, moved up here. There was a famous, he's a fireman, I don't know his name, all you guys know him, but he used to do fin first takeoffs. I'm talking on a full D-fin log, on way overhead waves at first peak, and he'd take off fin first, drop to the bottom, set the fin, spin it around, and surf the wave. I mean, that's the kind of guys that were surfing here in the 60s. Yeah. And of course, Howe is the grand master surfer. Doug Howe is an incredibly beautiful style master surfer. You know, and of course, Novak was surfing then. I'll think of other names. You know, those are the guys that I knew. Yeah. John Mell really moved up here. It was probably 69. So I'm talking like this more longboard. Well, the Van Dykes were from San Francisco, and they certainly came down here and surfed here. Peter Cole came and surfed here. He went to Stanford. You know, so a lot of the big wave. So Santa Cruz is directly connected to the North Shore. Santa Cruz Road, we have real waves here, and there's real men surfing, and women, of course. Right. But it was a he-man surfing culture then. I'm talking about then, not today. Because I totally respect female surfers and have a lot to say about that. But at the time, you know, it's no wetsuits, no cords. big waves, giant, heavy boards. And it was like a He-Man type of a sport.
Right.
It was. So
As you said before, earlier, you have to be you were a fisherman, or you were to do with the water. The water was already in your veins.
right, and that was more even before us. We were like still invading the coastline. But the woodboard era produced really hardcore guys. But Santa Cruz culture, they went straight to the North Shore, and whatever they were doing in Hawaii, they were doing in Santa Cruz. Where Southern California really became more of an influence to this general population of surf culture. Most all the music and stress and type of surfboards that you would relate to California all came from Southern California. Santa Cruz was more influenced by Hawaii, but the Santa Cruz guys, and here's where I'm going with this, they love Santa Barbara, and because of the Hollister Ranch. So the Santa Cruz guys would never go to Southern California, but they all came to Santa Barbara. And so Peter and I met the first hardcore group of Santa Cruz guys at the end of our street, because we lived just below Hammond's Reef. We ride our little Stingray bikes to check the surf at Miramar every single day before school. And underneath the 48 Ford pickup is Ken Kaufman and Art the Gimp, who's a legendary character here, and Paul Meltzer, who's so very well known.
The attorney.
Yeah, but we don't think of him as the attorney. You had to know him when we were 14. That's the Paul we know and love. So these guys are sleeping under the truck, and the one guy had a piece of cardboard over his head. That was Paul, so the axle grease wouldn't mess up his hair. And we thought, these guys are cool, so we invited them. Hey, we're leaning into the truck. What are you guys doing under there? Come on over for breakfast. And so we take them to our house, make them bacon and eggs, and our mom was sleeping, and they were raiding the icebox. And so they'd be down. Well, we'd be up seeing our dad and surfing Santa Cruz. We'd surf Pleasure Point mainly, in the lane.
Yeah.
Those are the main two spots. And we'd always run into them. So we had been friends and became part of the Santa Barbara guys. And John Tipple was one of those guys that was back and forth. And so a lot of us, and then I was hanging out at the Hout Shop into the late 60s, and I met Mark Angel. He'd come down and shape with, he'd come to my shop, shape there, and I'd hang out at Doug's.
Yeah.
This is like late 60s going into the 70s. But there was a real connection between Santa Barbara and Santa Cruz, surf culture. Because we didn't go down south either.
No, right.
We were like totally anti LA. Yeah. And so our joke is that LA starts at Ventura and goes down to Imperial Beach. And of course, some of my best friends are from LA, so this is all fun.
It's fun, yeah.
But all of our friends, no matter what town they're from, they said, "Oh yeah, I live in Carlsbad." Oh yeah, in LA.
Yeah.
It's not in LA. It's like, yeah, no, sure it is.
South of Ventura South, right? San Diego.
Geography.
It was all LA.
Hey, it's like
Simple science.
it's LA.
Yeah.
So we just have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. When did you start shaping? In the 60s?
Yeah.
Did you?
64. I shaped my first complete, because I started restoring surfboards, and when I was 12, so 62.
Restoring as like ding repair?
Yeah,
guy?
ding repair.
Okay.
But I would get for $4 or $5 boards that were missing a fan,
Right.
and the nose and tails broken off,
Yeah.
and I would buy these things, and I'd take them home, and I'd go to the White Owl shop in Summerlin, and I'd get scrap fiberglass and peat chunks of foam, and I'd glue them all together, and I'd try and fiberglass it. My mom would come out, "You need to put dowels in there to hold that foam on." "Oh, Mom, you don't need to tell me what to do." And then the next day I'd go to the shop, and Jeff White, who's our board builder, would say, "You need to put dowels in there to hold it on." "Okay, Mom."
She was right.
Of course she was right. So I did repairs, and then when I was 14, I had a piece of a surfboard that was big enough to make about a 5-foot. I made a small surfboard out of it, and I glassed it with all strips of patch scrap fiberglass and pigmented it. Remember, it's blue on the bottom and green on the deck, made a little fin. And all these guys surfed it. They could surf the damn thing because it only weighed 70 pounds.
Right.
So that was my first board. And then when I was 17,
But this, you make this shortboard revolution.
Oh, it's nothing to do with me.
No?
I was just cheap. I was like Chuck Foley. I couldn't afford a whole blank, so
Right.
when I had half of one, I just made a surfboard out of it.
Yeah.
That's not creativity. That's
Yeah.
just,
It's just common sense.
well, it's, what do you call that?
It's-
Poverty is the mother of invention. But that led to, I wrecked his white owl when he had moved. We'd split up, the family had split up for a couple of years, and my brother and sister lived with my mom. They moved to Idaho for a couple of years, and I had left there and moved in with my dad in the Bay Area.
Is it hard for you that you're away from your bro?
It was less crowded.
He liked one less guy.
It's
One
not
less
a guy
guy in the
water.
water, right?
Well, the good news was is I could use his board.
Oh,
At high tide at the lane.
Yeah.
With that?
At high tide.
Yeah,
at
High
the
tide the lane, that's where you destroyed it.
Well, before surf leashes and wetsuits, you can use your own board when the tide's high.
Right.
So I'd use his board. Went into, there used to be a cave before all the riprap. So at Steamer Lane, they were right where the stairs are now. There used to be Bird Rock or Pinnacle Rock. Remember that? You have to Google that. That's been gone for, I don't know, 30 years, 40. But that was like a landmark. There'd always be two seagulls on it. Every famous photo of the lane has Pinnacle Rock with the two birds on it. And then the center peak peeling off on each side of it. And there's a cave just inside of there where Inside Curl starts. And so the board goes in the cave, you're swimming and waiting for the pieces to come back out so you can get on it and paddle in. So his board comes out with no fin, the nose and tail are crushed, and there's a ding on every square inch of the rails. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to make myself a new board out of this. And I shaped a 7.3 swallowtail V-bottom out of it. It was 1968, maybe in December, in February, so it's the beginning of 68. And that board, I have pictures of it in my book. There's a picture of me holding it. I mean, I might have only been 16 when I made that board. I think I was 16 years old, so it's 1967.
Yeah.
So it's the beginning of
He didn't know
shortboards.
about it. No.
He doesn't need to know, he's busy.
He's 1,500 miles.
He's trying to get out of doing homework and ditching school and shit. He didn't need to know about any of this.
He's trying to help.
Yeah. So I made that board, and that board was, it took me, 15 more boards before I had one that worked that good.
Yeah,
That one
yeah.
was just a magic board. And that one ended up breaking in half again at Pleasure Point. I cut school during the week, and I know this is, probably nobody cares, but in the 60s, during the week, you could surf Steamer Lane or Pleasure Point by yourself anytime you wanted to, because no one was out. And so I went down, I cut school, I drove down, and it was a good solid 6 foot day, and you couldn't tell. It looked like it was 3 or 4 feet because there isn't one person out, and it's
Right.
like today, just powder blue water, not a breath of wind. But we didn't know we didn't have tide tables then.
Right.
There weren't surf forecasts. I just drove down there, the surf
at
was
it.
pumping. I got my trunks and a vest on, wetsuit vest, and I paddle out, and it was way overhead.
Cold.
It was really cool.
Right.
And I lost my board on the second wave or third wave.
No leash.
Of course not.
No.
Yeah, and I'm in trunks and just a vest. And the tide at that point had come in, and it was smashing up against the cliff. There's a big backwash, so
Yeah.
I was swimming. You had to swim down past Jack O'Neill's house, and I don't think he owned it yet, but the house was there. You had to go past it, and there's that beach
Yeah.
between the
Cove.
hook.
Yeah.
There's a cove
Yeah,
beach.
yeah.
So I knew I could get in there, and I almost didn't make it. From hypothermia, I was pretty sure I was ready. I could see the shore, and I could feel myself getting ready to pass out.
Right.
And right at that time, this is where my belief in God started. The front half of my board floated right to me. It come off the cliff, broken in half on the cliff. And it was a double stringer longboard blank. The 7.3 broke in half. It was a pretty heavy surf. And I climbed on it. I paddled that thing with that last ounce of strength, and I got on that sand, and when I tried to stand up, my body I just fell face first into the sand. And a guy had climbed down the cliff. He was a skin diver.
There was no wall back then. There's a wall there now, right? That wasn't
There was just a bluff.
Right.
You had to climb down the bluff to get in and out of the water. There was no steps or anything.
Right.
He climbed down the bluff, threw me over his shoulder because I probably only weighed 135. He throws me over his shoulder, climbs back up the cliff, sits me in the bus stop seat, and leaves.
Hey, did?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll never forget it. That was the first time I almost died at Pleasure Point. So that was the beginning of my surfboard career because that board worked really good. And from after that board, I only made my own boards. That was 67. And I started making boards. And of course, Pete was my first and still longest standing test pilot because he's way better athlete than me. He still rides 6-foot boards. You know, and it's pretty amazing. Not a lot of people can do. There's not many left that are in our age group that can still ride small boards. And I never was good. I was 7 foot was short for me.
That incident when you found on the beach and the guy took you up there didn't deter you from surfing. You know, next day, like, okay, right? Nothing.
Well, I was still breathing, wasn't I?
Yeah,
I
right?
forgot about it.
I was probably all good by the next day. It's
Yeah.
like, oh look, it's 1 to 2. I'm going out. No, I don't think that was ever a thought. I don't think there's nothing that ever would deter you. I mean, you could be half dead and just try and figure out how to recover so you can go back out.
Yeah.
Right?
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's 60s, and I'd say that. So we were visiting Santa Cruz all through the 60s, every summer. So that's why we have a connection. We were surfing here. We surfed in the 60s. We surfed heavily at Waddell Creek, Año Nuevo,
Davenport.
and Davenport Landing. And we called it Phantom Reef. We'd never seen anyone with a surfboard there.
On the North Point or the South Point?
South.
South Point
Because
there?
remember, it's summer. We're here at the South Swell.
Yeah.
A lot of foam in the water. And all
Kelp
these
bulbs.
weird sea life.
Right, I know.
Fishes, especially the kind with triangular fins and stuff.
Yeah. It's busy there.
It was creepy and deep water going
Yeah.
into shallow.
Yeah.
It's like you don't know what's lurking down there.
No. Still, it's like that to this day. When you go out there, still busy out there with different stuff.
We would have our parents, one parent would drive us down and drop us on a Friday night, and then another parent would get us Sunday afternoon, and they would leave us there
The whole weekend.
at Davenport.
Right.
And we would camp, we'd just sleep on the sand. We'd have a sleeping bag, a Coleman stove, and 4 cans of pork and beans. And this has been the longboard days, so we only had trunks and a vest, and no leashes, of course.
Right.
And we actually surfed Davenport pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be 4 or 5 foot surf. When we surfed it, you lose your board, it would go up on that shelf. There's a shelf there,
Right.
and it would go. You'd have to climb up it and
Yeah.
get your board off of it, right? And we camped even at Año Nuevo on the beach there, right in the corner.
Yeah.
Nobody surfed. I only once saw surfers on the beach at Waddell. All those summers we would go, we'd surf there,
Yeah.
and we'd be the only ones there
Yeah.
in the summer. So we surfed there a lot. And then, of course, Pleasure Point was really probably the best place in the summer in Santa Cruz. So when the swell was good, we'd be down at Pleasure.
South Swells.
Yeah, South Swell. And First Peak was the place,
Right.
you know, for sure. That's where it all went down.
We didn't know what a south swell was back then.
No, we just knew there was
you
surf.
just looked at it. Yeah. There was no map or
You have to go to see if there was any waves.
Right. We never knew. We just go.
Right.
Marine band radio,
None of that.
surf line.
Nothing.
It was so
Did you
cool.
go down to Sharks? No,
Of course not.
No.
You know, actually, there was a hardcore group that would only surf the hook.
Right.
No one surfed any of those places. I never surfed them until I broke my back and I was convalescing.
Yeah.
And I had to surf privates and cows. Never surfed them. Nobody surfed those places.
Too tame?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, if all the regulars are surfing First Peak
Yeah.
and Indicator,
Yeah.
I mean, nobody even surfed natural bridges then.
Right. Right. Really?
Yeah, I mean, nobody surfed those places. None of that.
What's that?
Swift Street.
No, none of that.
Yeah, we're still in the 60s, remember? So
And you're still shaping broken bits and pieces of boards,
Yeah.
right?
But
You haven't actually shaped the surfboard yet. I mean, not from a proper blank.
No.
You just everything's just been like
Uh,
a jigsaw puzzle.
I probably by '69 I was buying blanks from John Mell and Bob Weiss in the city, and Mell had a little shop in 41st. That was before Pete was born.
Yeah.
When he was born, but he was married to Kim. And I go in the shop, and John Mell, I'll never forget. Because he's a few years older than me, not by much. He says, "Yeah, Kim's going to law school. I'm going to get to retire soon." He used to tell me that.
He did?
Of course, she's standing right there.
Right.
You know, she had a braid all the way down her back. She's so cute. You know, and then Pete came along, and I'd go buy my materials, and he'd be in his walker in the showroom knocking boards off the rack and stuff. I haven't seen him since.
Yeah. Oh, you haven't?
No.
That's fine.
But I bought proper materials then and would make a board from scratch, out of regular blanks. That would have been, probably 69 and 70 by 1970. It's regular.
And you already have shortboard experience. You've already, right?
Yeah.
Right. Even though, when was the shortboard revolution? When did that?
December of 1967.
Okay.
That's when Nat Young, George Greeno, and Bob McTavish rode there. Of course, George already invented shortboarding with his Velo V-board, and that would be 62.
Yeah.
But that's when McTavish and Nat Young rode their V-bottoms at Honolulu Bay. And that was the shot that was heard around the world, that we don't need to ride a longboard slogging along anymore. You can turn and accelerate out of a bottom turn. There isn't one of us that wanted to ever do it. And so that was December of 1967. And so by January of 68, we're all on miniguns and then V-bottoms.
Pleasure point.
Everywhere. Oh yeah, all hardcore guys.
Yeah.
At least I would tell me what you think, but it seems like 50% of the surfers quit that first year. They couldn't make the transition to small boards. Most to have
Quit surfing, or they
Quit surfing.
Quit surfing altogether?
Yeah.
Really?
yeah, because there were no more longboards. They did not exist. No one would
They
make them.
they fell off the planet.
It took a year to get rid of them. No one would buy them.
Really?
That's why the Big 12 down in LA, most of them went out of business, because they would make up to between 200 and 500 boards per week in the summer.
Stock up.
Really?
They would, yes.
This is a surf shop.
We're talking Hovey, Dewey,
Okay.
Weber, Greg Knoll,
Right.
Jacob, the real guys,
Right.
the kings. And they would send those boards all over the West Coast and all over the East Coast. And so they would build them all in advance. Shortboard revolution hits, they're done.
Yeah.
They're sitting on all this inventory. People were buying them for $10 and stripping the cloth off them, brand new, the cat models. Nobody made longboards, nobody rode longboards. It ended in a matter of 3 months. It was over. And us young guys, because I'd already was building boards and restoring them, I was the first guy making one for myself, and immediately I could never go to the beach without getting an order. Today was one of the rare days I didn't get an order.
Today?
Still daylight.
Hey, I need a new board.
But I still meet people every time I go surfing.
Yeah.
It's your board, hey, that's a cool board, and they look at it and you get to talk, and it's like, hey, will you make me one, And that's really all that happened.
Did you try and make it look differently back then? I mean, George Greeno, did you copy what he was doing, or did you have your own flavor, as it were?
No, I'm going to say that my influence is 100% Santa Barbara style surfing, which is, point breaks. The waves here come straight in and hit a reef, and they have a lot of base to them, but not a lot of high down the line pocket. You have some of that at a few spots here, but mainly it's just chunky surf coming straight in out of deep water. In Santa Barbara, it's coming around a corner,
Right.
180 degrees, and it's like a whip.
Right.
And so when you get into one of those waves, it may only be this big when you take off, but it's this big when you get into the short break. Because it has this whipping effect, and the wave actually is accelerating as it wraps around the curve. And so we had very flat rocker boards with a lot of hull entry to navigate that high pocket where all the speed is in the wave. It's not at the base of the wave. It requires a different style.
Were you the only person to figure that out, or other shapers figured that out?
I mean, Rennie Yater, you know, was John Eichert made Ike surfboards in Santa Barbara. You had Rennie Yater, Jeff White and Brian Bradley making White Owls. Well, we're talking 60s.
Oh, 60s.
Yeah, 60s. If we're talking 60s, that was Wilderness did start. Michael Cundit and George Greeno started Wilderness in '68. You know, so that's 60s. Wilderness. Bob Duncan runs it today.
But still, Santa Barbara didn't have surf like you here. I mean, surfing seems like you have to hear every day. Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara. The reason all you Santa Cruz guys come down there is because we have the perfect surf.
Down there?
You guys just have a lot of surf.
Yeah.
That's real surf.
Okay.
There's nothing better than the surf down there.
Right.
That's the best surf in California.
Yeah.
I can say that because there's nobody here to
Nobody here with that whip.
Yeah, but we don't have a lot of it.
Yeah.
But you know, the ranch is like what was part of the greatest folklore of surfing in California. So everybody tried to get into that place by sneaking in, boating in, or whatever. We all did it. And so, you know, Rincon is still those type of waves, El Capitan, Campus Point. You know, I mean, we have like incredible point break surf down here. And when it's good, you know, it's better than here. Like when we get a southwest swell here, those days that you might get 2 or 3 days a year, where it's just grinding down the line and just barely making it. That doesn't happen here that often.
No,
but that's what it's like down there when there's a swell.
Right.
And so it's a different kind of a wave.
Right.
But and certainly Greeno was a huge influence in the shortboard line, but all those early board builders that I talked about built boards for point waves. And they had a lower rocker and a lot of roll in them. And they were really sleek, narrow outlines. None of this fat nose riding crap. That never ever came out of Santa Barbara. That's all LA.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was really my influence. And then Greeno is my biggest influence when you consider that I'm a transition board builder, so I'm making modern shortboards. And he's the one who set the stage for all of that, for all of us.
Right.
But I followed, you know, that line of single fan, low rocker, displacement vault entry. Yeah, that's really pure Greeno, and I stayed with that all the way through all the decades. Yeah. I never wanted to make boards for a living, or I don't want to be popular. We just did it because we loved the way they ride. We just love surfing. So it's not common and it's not well understood. And very few people build them, you know. So it's fun. That makes it fun, I think.
A lot of fun. But in the shortboard revolution, things were changing every month. You'd be on one type of design, and then okay, well, let's do a twin fin. You know, so now we're riding twin fins, and then it's like, okay, forget that. Let's do this. It started with the V-bar, and it just every month seemed like
Shapers trying to outdo each other with different. What were they trying to
No,
find? What were they trying to do?
we were
Find speed?
very-
Were they trying to find speed?
Absolute speed.
Right.
Well, the ultimate is speed and maneuverability.
Right.
And so you want to have. Our goal was to have a mind machine that whatever you imagined you could do, your board would allow you to do it. That was the goal. And the reason he knows about every shape is because we're such a small group of people making these boards that a lot of us started then, and we all were bonding, you know. So we're all trying these things and following what each other's trying and trying our version and looking at whose is working the best. I mean, there was a lot. It's such a small world. I mean, they're so connected, and you don't need an internet to be connected. And when you're part of the surf world, it's this little tiny, cool lifestyle that everyone knows. It was really the magazines and the films were kind of the main link. Magazine, like Surfer Magazine, and Bruce Brown and Bud Brown and Weaver and Wills and McGillivray Freeman and all those guys, they made films for surfers, and that was part of how we all kept up with what's going on. They'd travel. All of us traveled. We went to Hawaii, we went to South America, we went to Mexico.
Australia.
We went to Australia. And they all did the same, so we're all going all around the world. And a lot of guys, like Howard, spent a lot of time in France and Europe. I never went that way, but all of us are traveling around, and we're bringing our boards and we're surfing. And it's funny how you just end up meeting the guys that are like the core guys in it. Because if some guy's gone to the trouble of traveling with a backpack and one surfboard, you've got a lot in common.
Yeah.
It's not just a guy on vacation that happened to rent a board.
He was a surfer.
He's serious about it.
Yeah.
And we were dead serious about everything we did.
Yeah.
And so, it was like...
You still are? You still are, though? You're still dead serious about everything, too.
Yeah.
This day, right?
Yeah, it's not changed any.
No.
Just the body,
Yeah.
I hate when that
not the
happens.
mind.
Huh?
We're killing it in our own mind.
I know. It's like we were out, us three of us out there that day. We just like, I see that way, but I can't get that way anymore. So I tried.
It's fun.
I told a gal today out there, I go, you know what? I want to be, when I get my genie, one of my wishes is to be 125 pounds for like 2 weeks and I catch every single freaking wave, right? I want to go back to being 220, but right now, that's my genie wish.
Why for just 2 weeks?
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
I know.
But that was the 60s.
That's 60s.
Did we hit the 60s?
Well, let's end the 60s.
Okay, and the 60s.
Let's end the 60s, and
Okay.
then we'll save the 70s for next time.
Yeah, for another beer and some more food.
Absolutely.
On me next time.
It's a deal.
Okay.
Okay,
All
we
right.
got to schedule that one immediately.
Tomorrow morning breakfast.
I was going to be in China, but for a free lunch. I'll come over.
Well, what Pete was saying, so picture December of 1967 starts the shortboard revolution, and our shortboard, the Australians started with V-bottoms, but because of our connection to Hawaii, Dick Brewer is making miniguns. And so all of us started, I started with the V-bottom. That's more really because of my Greeno influence. But like Chapin, we saw John Chapin today, and all these guys, they were all on miniguns, and my first minigun I rode was probably Chapin's. It's an 8.8, and Tilton, Seltzer, and all the underground board builders here were making miniguns. They're basically 8.8 pintail with a flexible, real rake-back fin. And those were the first shortboards here. But then immediately, we went to the wide-tail V-bottoms. Then they dropped to 8 feet in V-bottoms. And then 7.6. And at 7.6, they became more of a teardrop outline with the tail pulled in. The bottoms became flatter with roll in the front. And then, so by 1970, so now we have 68, 69, only 2 years now. And now we're down to 510s. 510 single fins. Pete and I met Mike Doyle. Picture this. Mike Doyle, who, Lord rest his soul, just passed away. One of the great watermen of all time. And Pete and I are at
He was
Año
a big
Nuevo.
guy. He was a big.
Great, he's 6'4", probably 190 pounds, right, when he's fit. So Pete and I are at Año Nuevo, and by the later 60s, Año was a real surf spot because we're riding little boards now, and they work great in Año. Our longboards didn't work too good there.
Must you like to swim?
Yes, really?
It was a short swim, but it was really cold.
Right.
So Pete and I are on the beach, and we see this guy by himself at Año, and it's an offshore wind overhead, just those wedging peaks when back in the good old days. This guy just ripping on this tiny board, and we're like, oh my God, and we stand on the beach, and here he comes in. It's Mike Doyle with a 5'9". 5'9".
6'4".
Yeah, and he's 6'4". He laid it on the beach, and we BS'd with him, and he told me all about the board, and he told me all the dimensions. I checked
He
the
shaped
rocker.
it?
Yeah, he's a shaper. He shaped for Hansen, you know, and rode for Hansen surfboards in Encinitas forever. So I went
That's
straight
LA,
home.
by the way. It's LA.
Yeah, that's why I meant.
Southern LA.
No, Encinitas. It's a suburb of LA. Yeah, a township. Yeah.
It's LA.
So I went straight home, and this is with Pete. We're always building whatever I'd make one for him and one for me. Unless it was unwritable, then I'd only make one. I went.
Pete, he'll try anything.
I know, right?
I went
Right.
straight home, and we called it the Doyle model forever. It had a 12-inch deep fin, single fin,
Well,
arc tail, 19 inches wide, 5'9", probably 3 inches thick.
I thought it was less than 19.
No, I think it was 19. That's
you
what I
rode that
remember.
thing?
Oh shit, yeah. So check this out. In those days, you only had one surfboard. There's
In
no
the dead of
surfboard.
winter, when it's
Yeah.
mackerel, this tiny little board. I didn't know the difference. It's like my surfboard. I'm at middle peak, you know, when it's capping at the third reef.
Yeah.
It's like bumping off, you know, second.
Yeah.
It's like riding the indicator on it. So
Yeah.
that's all I knew.
No leashes yet.
None. Out there.
I took the board that I'd made him a 610 that was too thick. I drew a template in the middle of his board, and I cut it out, right out of the middle of his board. And I reshaped it into the 5'9". And it was green. I glassed it, made a fin. I don't remember what, I might have made a red fin.
You made the thing.
I made every fin then. You had to. You couldn't buy them anywhere.
No fin makers.
Yeah. Well, actually, Rainbow started in the late 60s, but we couldn't afford to buy shit. Like, we had our own stuff.
They were $8.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, that's a lot of money back
That's
then.
right.
That's like 18 cans of pork and beans.
We could have lived on that for
Right.
6 months. So that was his only board, and he rode that thing. Well, 3 months later, we went to twin fins. So in 1970. So my point is in 2 years we went from riding full nose riders, longboard, concave nose, tight board. That's what was popular. To mini guns, to V bottoms, to little spear shapes, to 510 stubbies, to twin fins.
Yeah.
And picture that, 510. So that's why everybody quit surfing. Half of the people quit surfing. Because only the guys who were completely invested in it were going to stay with it.
Yeah.
And all the recreational guys are gone. Because there's a lot of, like today, it's 90% recreational. Back then, it was half recreational and half hardcore.
Right.
And then, so that's going to be our segue into the 70s. So the 70s was when there was only hardcore. There was no recreation surfing.
Right.
Everyone that was in it, it was like they're all the way in, and it was way too intense.
Right.
Really, it was really ridiculous in
All
a
right,
way.
we'll save that for next time. The intense 70s coming up.
Exactly.
Was that when Rear Tops Now came out from Australia?
That was 60s.
Okay.
Holding off on the 60s.
But that mentality kind of stayed.
That was just competition, That was the Australians. That was the '66 World Contest when Nat Young won, and he won it on a Magic Sand, a longboard, and 2-foot waves. But he really wasn't the best surfer ever.
Who was that?
Nat Young from Australia.
Yeah.
But he won that contest, and even today, John Witzig, who wrote that article, said it really was BS because the Australians, they didn't care. They're all friendly with the Americans. They just like to throw stuff out there to get you in the face, to punch you in the face and see how you react.
Yeah.
And they wrote that article, and everybody thought we're going to show them.
Yeah.
They didn't care.
Yeah.
Didn't we send a crew of people down there to, like match up and I forget all that. I don't
Nobody
really
cared.
care.
No one cares,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you.
Pete?
Yeah.
A lot of fun, huh?
Thanks. Yeah.
Got
Great to
50s,
see
but
you.
50s and 60s out of place.
Yeah.
And coming up soon will be the 70s and maybe the 80s. We don't know. I'm gonna buy him dinner and drinks. Could be a while.
Please. That was during the Miami Vice era, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, that's
no,
a
that
great
was
era.
a blur.
Miami Vice.
Yeah.